Welcome to the Checkered Floor Garage. This is the Kawasaki Vulcan 750 Maintenance and Service Series, and today I'm going to show you how to tune your manual cam chain tensioners, your MCCTs. In one of my first YouTube videos for this channel, I showed how to install them, and then in a follow-up video, I showed how to adjust them using this 17mm half wrench. Since then, I've gotten a better mic, and I'm hoping to capture the extremes of having the cam chain tensioners either too tight or too loose. Before I show you the tuning process for the chain tensioners, I'm going to explain to you a little bit as to what's going on inside the engine and why this process is so important. This image here comes from a Honda CX500. Take note, we'll start down below with the crankshaft. That spins our cam chain, which goes all the way to the top of the engine, which spins the camshaft. This is part of your valve train system, and it keeps everything in perfect time such that your intake valves and your exhaust valves open and close at the precise perfect moments. Next, take note of our chain guides, those kind of black plastic bars on either side, the left side and right side of your cam chain. Those chain guides require the appropriate amount of tension onto the cam chain such that everything can run and operate smoothly. If those chain guides are too loose, you can get the chain slapping around, and if it's too tight, it's going to put too much tension on your cam chain. There's obviously a lot of other differences between our Vulcan V-twin and that Honda CX500 engine, but just to show you a little bit better, this is the factory automatic cam chain tensioner, and it works in a similar fashion to our manual cam chain tensioner. Whereas the manual one gets adjusted manually with our nut, this one has a spring inside from Kawasaki, and it's supposed to do the job automatically. The issue is, of course, that these don't last, so they ultimately eventually have to get replaced. But basically what's going on is that the end here supplies that appropriate amount of force or tension onto the cam chain guide, which then helps out the cam chain. This one is automatic for the first 15 to 25,000 miles whenever this happens to fail, and this one is manual. From what I've heard on the vn750.com forum is that basically 1 or 2 times per year, maybe once every oil change, they should be checked and adjusted accordingly. Or if you hear any noise, you should come here and either tighten or loosen it. So without further ado, let me show you what that tuning process looks like. First, it's important to do this with a warmed up engine, so let's get the engine up to operating temperatures. My strategy is going to be finding the middle point between the extremes of having the tensioner too loose and too tight. So with my 17mm half wrench, I'm going to loosen the main nut of the cam chain tensioner. I'm going to start with the front cylinder because there's plenty of room to work and operate and film. I want to loosen it all the way until I start hearing clanking. And then I'm going to count how many revolutions I did, and that'll be my lower extreme. And then I'll go back to where I started, and then from there, I'll start tightening the main nut all the way until the upper extreme of having the cam chain a little bit too tight. You're going to hear a little bit, hopefully, of engine whirring that I'll be able to capture on audio, and maybe even the idle will slow down a little bit. Once I have those two extremes, too loose cam chain tensioner and too tight cam chain tensioner, I'm going to basically just cut the difference and loosen back the cam chain tensioner, saying that word a lot. I'm going to put it right in the middle of those two extremes. This right here is your locking nut. I'm going to loosen this, which will then allow us to adjust this main nut, or it's actually a bolt. So this bolt here, this is the one that I'm going to loosen all the way to find the lower extreme, and I'll tighten it all the way to find the upper extreme. I also marked in red the corner of this bolt. That way it'll make it easier for me to count how many revolutions it makes. That came out really good on audio. I'm happy with that. A half a turn from my starting point, and you just started hearing the clanking of the cam chain. And then to show you further what a loose cam chain sounds like, I loosened it further to one full looser turn from my starting point, and you heard the clanking really bad. So what I did here is I wrote down loosen half a turn. So my lower extreme is half a turn from right here. Now I'm going to tighten this main bolt until I hear the whirring or some kind of idle engine slow speed. That'll be my upper extreme, and then from there I'll find the perfect middle place for my cam chain tensioners. This upper extreme of having it too tight was a little bit harder than I had thought to get captured on camera, but I did hear in person that at 1.5 turns tighter from where I started, and anywhere beyond this, my engine idle speed was slowing down. I didn't hear any whirring, but I think the better indicator is when you start hearing the engine idle slow down just a little bit. So now what I'll do is I'll loosen it back to where it was, where I'm used to riding this whole season, and that was 1.5 turns. There we go. Okay, so again, this is the starting point. This is where I've ridden now almost 3,500 miles this season. If I loosen it half a turn, I hear clanking. If I tighten it 1.5 turns and beyond, I start hearing the engine idle speed slow down. So my midpoint, I need to tighten my main bolt here 1/2 turn, just a half a turn tighter, because then I will be one full turn away from being too loose, and I'll be one full turn away from being too tight. I'll do a half a turn. And that is the perfect middle point between too loose and too tight. Go ahead and tighten up this locking nut there. And now let's move on to the rear cylinder on the right side of the bike. The rear cylinder manual cam chain tensioner is right here. We got to remove the coolant reservoir tank first with a 10 mil bolt, 10 mil socket. And then what you can do is pull up and out. I'm just going to keep this hanging. I don't want to disconnect anything with my coolant, so I'm just going to keep it hanging right there. I marked the main bolt there in red so it can help me count. And then again, I'll do the same thing. I'll start with loosening it to see how many turns it takes before I start hearing the clanking. I put the main nut back to its starting point, and what you heard on the video was 1.5 turns loose from this starting point. That's when the clanking started. So that's what I wrote down here. And then at 2 turns, that's when the clanking was much more noticeable, much worse. I just did that just to get it shown on film. Now I'm going to tighten it to see how many turns from the starting point, how many revolutions for the engine idle speed to slow down a little bit. So again, a little bit tougher to get on audio, it being too tight, and I'm a little bit hesitant to go tighter. Maybe if I go tighter, I will hear the whirring, but like I said, just a little anxious about that. I did hear the engine idle speed slow down at between like 1 and 1.5 turns. So I'm actually perfectly right in the middle. If I go too loose by 1.5, I hear the clanking. If I go too tight by 1.5, I hear the little bit of the engine slowdown speed. So I'm not going to adjust this at all. I'm going to keep it right as is. Don't forget to put the coolant reservoir tank back in. Align this nub here with this little hole right there. And don't forget to feed this vent hose also back here in between the back of the engine and that like swing arm pivot there. Also, route the vent hose above this rear brake cable. All right, above just like that. Tighten up the main locking nut here when you're done. And if you notice, there's like some of this gasket maker here, this high temp gasket maker. Myself and a few other Vulcan members have found that only on the MCCT for the rear cylinder, we get a tiny bit of oil leak coming out from the threads. So I found that applying this little gasket maker sealed it up, and I haven't had an oil leak since I installed these 1 year ago. All right, that's all in. One other tip with this rear brake cable, make sure that it goes in the indentation of your coolant reservoir tank right there in the back. See that? And that wraps up the tuning process for the manual cam chain tensioners. This isn't something that I do on any kind of routine basis. I haven't done this since I first installed the cam chain tensioners. I just couldn't capture the audio on my new mic here. As you can see, it's pretty flexible. For both the rear and the front cylinder, I've got roughly 1 or 1.5 entire revolutions of the main nut from either extreme. I also found out that although this gets you some good clearance, if you got the space and if you got the tool, use one of these ratcheting wrenches, 17 mil ratchet wrench, and it can make adjusting that main nut easier. You don't gotta take it off, adjust it, put it back on, turn it like 1/8 of a turn. You can just keep this on and just count quarter, half, etc. There's not much space, but it can work. I just figured I'd stick with this because I started the video with this and I'm stubborn. So check out the description down below for helpful links for the vn750.com forum. If you haven't checked out that forum, I highly suggest you do so. There's a lot of great information there. Thanks for watching and have a good one.